once in a while, a scheduling faux pas causes a little bit of a flip-flop, but that'll only be relevant if you're watching this video and its companion piece within the first couple of days that they're out. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel.
Unicorn Overlord.
Hello everyone, if you enjoy what I do, my coverage of Unicorn Overlord, tier lists that I do, or news about the gaming sphere in general, like the upcoming Aiden Chronicle, wink wink wink, then a like on this video and a subscription to the channel would be very much appreciated. Thank you so much. We are back with the third iteration, or the third step, I suppose you could say, the third episode of my overall class overview tier list for Unicorn Overlord. Now, normally, this tier list episode would be coming out after the next part of the actual class overview. However, again, due to kind of scheduling faux pas and just weirdness with editing and how lengthy the next episode of the class overview is, I think this one's actually going to come out the day or two prior to that. Won't be a huge deal once they're both out, but I know normally I like to have the class overview itself out first. If it just happens that the tier comes out first, then, well, so be it, right? We'll live. This episode is all of the promoted classes in Unicorn Overlord, and there are quite a bit of them, so I'm going to try to move through this fairly quickly. So without further ado, let's get to High Lord. High Lord is an archetypical example of the overpowered main character. Very much the opposite of many mid-of-the-series Fire Emblem Lords, reminiscent of characters like Sigurd from Genealogy of the Holy War, or more recently, the Avatar characters from Awakening, Fates, Three Houses, Engage, etc., that all tend to be extremely, extremely powerful, and High Lord is no exception. There's really, literally no other place it could be than S tier. Like, it does everything that base Lord does with its tankiness and its self-healing, while adding in a ton of different damage options and overall just being extremely strong. This, of course, is before we even consider the fact that it gets unique equipment like the Holy Unicorn Blade that makes it even stronger. It's just a phenomenal piece. There's no getting around it. High Lord is awesome. You have a mount, you have AoE attacks, you have tanking, you have self-healing. It does it all. And I really don't think I need to say much else beyond that. High Lord is just gross. Moving on to Vanguard. Vanguard is a very nice class and is a very nice promotion from the middle-of-the-road fighter. It is going in A tier. It is not an S tier class. It doesn't have phenomenal damage. It doesn't have ways to deal with things like debuffs and everything, but raw tanking potential, it is very, very good. The fact that it has extra AP and passive points from being a promoted class, the fact that it gets the defender attack that allows it to get extra defense to help it continue to tank for its allies, the increased stats that it has in general making it tankier. It's just the boost that fighter needed to go from good to really good, if not great. I love Vanguard. I'm more than happy to have Vanguards in my squads. They have a lot of versatility, a lot of utility, and yeah, while they're not going to be dealing massive AoE damage or taking debuffs off of your allies, if they can prevent some of those things from happening to your allies in the first place, I mean, that's just as good, right? There are a lot of people who very much look down on Vanguards, and I think that's very unfair to the class because they're just good, man, and I think people are a little bit prejudiced towards them because early game fighter is in a very tough position until it gets better gear and better skills. But Vanguard, A tier class, absolutely, you can fight me on that. Moving on to Sergeant. Sergeant, much like Soldier, is an S tier class, absolutely. The combos that it enables, the damage output that it has, the fact that it can support allies through healing, giving them guaranteed criticals, the fact that it has lance attacks, so it's extra effective against cavalry. There's just a lot going on for sergeants. They even have their own unique throwable flame lance that gives them a fire attack that can burn. Like, that's awesome. They're really, really strong. I'm really not surprised that the power of Soldier continues on to Sergeant. And frankly, I need to play with them way more. I only had one Sergeant available to me in my initial run of the game, and she was great. I mean, Sol was a phenomenal Sergeant, and she enabled my units to do a lot more than they otherwise would have been able to do. And I can only imagine once you get down into the combo potential that scales even more insanely. I love them. They're great. They belong in S tier because they can pretty much fit into any class or any unit, and that's largely what I'm looking at a lot of these classes for. Next up, we have Viking, and as much as I love them, I think Viking has to go in A tier, not S tier. They are very, very good at what they do. What they do is just destroy enemy defenses and overall cause a lot of problems. The issue is that they are quite vulnerable, and later in the game where you're going to be using them, that actually can become quite a problem for them. And I think that does actually knock them down a tier compared to the S tier that Housecarls occupy early in the game. Remember, we have to view these classes, especially the promoted classes, within the context of when you're going to be using them. Like, yeah, if you had a Viking at the time that you have Housecarls, they'd be S tier, no question. But in the mid to late game where you're actually going to have access to them, not quite as much. So why is this an issue? There are so many AoE attacks, so many different methods for a delicate unit like this to get blown up out of nowhere with no recourse to defend themselves. It becomes a problem. Like, they need to have something that is going to be able to protect them from attacks like that, say like a Vanguard, or maybe even like an Elven Fencer that's going to protect them from ranged attacks, things like that, that can then allow them to survive to do what it is that they want to do. Once they can do what they want to do, huge, phenomenal. The absolute shredding of physical defense that these guys do cannot be overstated. It's great for any physical attack-based class. But that's the other issue. If you're doing anything with magical attacks, then Vikings suddenly become far less useful. Like, yes, the defense shred that they do is going to further empower their own attacks, but in a class-based, unit squad-based system like Unicorn Overlord is, just being beneficial for yourself is not enough. It is not sufficient. So in any sort of squad that is going to be relying on doing more magic damage than not, the Viking loses so much from their capabilities. They're still solid. Like, their Warhorn ability making all physical attacks. Actually, I think it is just all physical attacks. Yeah, their Warhorn ability making attacks unguardable is huge. But again, like, they have a niche that they're in. And it's the fact that they're so good in that niche that keeps them higher than, like, B or even, probably not C, but B on the tier list. That's very, very good for them, but they still can't quite broach S in the way that some other classes can. Now, we want to talk about a class that's disappointing to me. We got to talk about Swordmaster. Swordmaster, I almost want to put them in D tier, but I don't think they're quite that bad. Yeah, I can't put them any higher than C tier, and even that feels bad, man. By the time you're using Swordmasters regularly, they need so much to be able to actually do anything due to their overall low damage output, Death of 1,000 Cuts style, that I just don't like them. Like, I can see that they have potential. Don't get me wrong. Doing some, like, lucky coins, Sniper's Amber Lens, guaranteed hit, guaranteed crit shenanigans with attack boosts and defense nerfs to enemies, like with a Viking. Like, there is potential there, to be sure. But I really feel like the class needed to be getting some form of attack boost from their second sword. If you didn't know, Swordmasters can equip 2 swords, and they get all of the, like, special abilities from their secondary sword, like if it has a unique attack or if it adds accuracy, crit, anything like that. But its raw damage and its base crit rate don't apply. And that is brutal, because Swordmasters have such abysmally low base attack that it makes it really, really hard for them to actually do the damage that you want or need them to do. And when they can deal damage to squishy targets, they do shred, but that's anything. Like, you don't need a Swordmaster to shred a squishy. Anything that's hitting it with physical attacks will shred it. That's not a benefit to them. So I know there's going to be people that say, well, there's all these different things you can do with them. There's all these different combos you can do with them. Oh, it's my favorite class. Oh, they're very strong. And that's fine. And, like, yeah, if I spend more time with them and I really theory craft around them, maybe I would want to bump them up a tier or two. But they just failed to impress me in the way that most other classes did. And that is just such a shame. That is such a shame, man. So, yeah, I cannot put these elegant yet kind of weak-wristed, limp-wristed warriors any higher than C tier, unfortunately. You know, maybe it's just biased because Fire Emblem Swordmasters are so busted, but yeah, I don't know. There's just more that they could have done, I feel like. So, C tier is where they're going to reside. Now, something that definitely belongs in higher than C tier, it's the Landsknecht. Now, again, as much as I love them, I don't think I can put them in S tier. Much like I love the base sellsword, but don't think it could go higher than B tier. They're really, really good at the one thing that they do, and that's smashing really, really, really hard. But they do want a particular setup. They want something tanky in the front line that is going to be able to survive so they can continue to do following slashes. They want to ensure that they aren't blinded or in some other way afflicted, debuffed, whatever, so that they can get big attacks like Bastard's Cross in. And kind of similar to Viking, they want to be in a very physical-focused team. And while they are disgustingly good, again, my favorite squad in the game was 3 Landsknechts, a Viking, and a Legionnaire, and they destroyed everything. They do still have their limitations. If you're fighting anything flying, they're going to struggle. If you're fighting anything with magic damage, they could wind up having problems before they even get their attacks out. If you're fighting anything that's going to put any afflictions on them and you don't have a reliable way to remove it, they just get shut down. They have their problems for sure, and as such, they can't quite hit S rank, but God, they're phenomenal. And like A rank is nothing to sneeze at here. Really, none of these tiers are anything to sneeze at, really, but A rank in particular, still more than happy to have in my retinue for sure. So it's a happy place for me to have Landsknecht. I love them. They're definitely my favorite class in the game. But looking at it objectively, I cannot put them in S tier. Now, Legionnaires. Legionnaires are interesting. I put Hoplites in C because they were very, very basic. And Legionnaires do still feel that way to a degree. But something that makes me bump them up a tier to B, and I think that's where they're going to go, is the fact that they do give such strong defenses for entire rows of your allies. And how, especially once you have access to all of their skills and some of the really disgustingly strong great shields in the game, they can actually become nigh impenetrable without very specific counters, like something with like a hammer, you know? And that is not nothing. Man, like Legionnaires are really, really good at what they do. It's just, again, you don't want them in every unit. They still completely fold to magic enemies unless you've completely spec them into resisting magic damage, in which case they'll be okay against it, but like, why do that at that point? Just pack something like a Sainted Knight. Hell, bring a Sainted Knight with your Legionnaire and then that problem will be solved, but still, like, you can't just slap them into any given unit and call it a day. So they're really good where they're good, and there's absolutely times where I've been so happy that I had a Legionnaire with my sellswords, with my Landsknechts, because he was just impenetrable. But there are also going to be times where they weigh you down, they slow you down, they don't deal any damage. I dropped all attacks off my Legionnaire by the end of the game and made him just a pure wall. It's gonna be not useful all the time, and as such, I don't think I can put them any higher than B tier. Now, Berserkers, my hot take of the last couple episodes was putting Gladiator in A and keeping it in A, and congratulations to all the naysayers out there. That is exactly where Berserker is going as well. I truly, truly feel that Berserkers are very undersold as a class. They're actually fairly versatile. You can put them in the back line and just use them as raw damage dealers. You can put them in the front line and beef up their healing capabilities, their defensive, to actually make them like pretty good HP tanks. And the damage output that they can have is so gross. People are like, well, yeah, but the accuracy issues, whatever. But like, they really don't have as much of an accuracy issue as you might think. Just being able to slap a pair of spectacles onto them will fix a lot of their accuracy problems just on their own without requiring any other specific classes in the unit. Like, going in with Bruno and just grand smashing everything and rarely having it miss was such a joy. Like, Berserkers have, I would say, one of the highest ceilings for just raw damage capabilities. If you get them kitted out with any sort of good gear, you give them any sort of stat boosts, or again, have any sort of units or any sort of classes in their unit that are going to make them more capable, give them a guaranteed hit, give them a guaranteed crit, put some sort of magic effect on their attacks, they're going to crush half of the enemy unit, if not more, with one attack. They are awesome, and they're really good at keeping themselves alive in the process. Hell, by the end of the game, they have an ability that's going to heal themselves and give them an attack boost, which is insane, and you can guarantee that they survive an attack and get extra AP so they can come in swinging with one final giant crush. Like, they really, it's a high-risk, high-reward playstyle, and I absolutely understand that, but because of this being a unit-based system in the way that it is, the versatility that Berserkers have as either a frontliner or a backliner, and all the different ways that you can support them to be able to do so much so easily, makes them A tier for me. You know, an easy comparison is Swordmaster. It's like, well, why do I have Swordmaster in C tier when you could say you could use a lot of the same arguments? The issue is that I feel like Swordmasters have a much lower floor that you have to work up from compared to Berserker. Berserker doesn't need much to get going, and then once they're going, they are devastating. Swordmasters, in my experience, you need to put so much more effort into just to make them do what you want them to do, and then they still get completely stonewalled by anything with any sort of defense. I'm not even talking like Vanguards and Legionnaires. Like, a Great Knight can just tank anything the Swordmaster is going to throw at them unless you have a bunch of different buffs and debuffs in there. You don't need that with Berserker, in my experience. So, yeah, I think they're phenomenal. I think anyone that is not using Berserkers or thinks that they're a bad class, you are underserving yourself from the hysterical capabilities of these absolutely brutally massive lads. Go give them another look. I promise you, they're awesome. Moving on to Breaker. Now, this is probably one of the biggest glow-ups in the entire game. I had Warriors in C rank, and I stand by that. I almost want to drop some of these down. I feel like I can't readjust anything until we get to the end of the tier list. But, like, I really kind of want to drop Warrior and Sword Fighter down to D for the early game. But we'll hold off on that. Breaker, though. Breaker is incredible. Breaker is easily an A. Potentially, I almost want to say S, honestly. Like, the insane damage output that Breaker has, and localized completely to themselves between Enrage and Row Smash, you can put them in any squad. And just the nature of that squad getting attacked is going to put the Breaker's damage so high that when they come out swinging with that one swing, it's over for like 2 or 3 enemies. Plus, with their anti-armor capabilities, they get access to axes that have a lot of good strengths. You know, I think I got to put them in S tier. They're really strong. I only had one Breaker through my entire initial run of the game, but I was very, very impressed by her once she promoted and actually got going. Like, it was insane. I didn't need to be doing anything to her. I gave her her gear, I slapped her in the back line of a squad and just let her go, and she just dismantled things with that giant meat tenderizer of a hammer that she has. So, yeah, I think I'm pretty comfortable with S tier. These are just some of the best damage output units in the game. They are entirely self-sufficient. I love them. I can't wait to use more of them. Breakers are super sick. It has to be an S tier unit. Moving on to Snipers. Snipers, I really like Hunters, but Snipers kind of started to fall off for me a bit. I don't think they're quite C tier, but I don't like them as much as I like Hunters in their contextual use cases. So that almost... it almost does make me want to bump Swordmaster down to D tier. And because, like, honestly, I like Sword Fighter more than Swordmaster in their respective tiers. Oh, man. Am I really going to do this? I think I am. Because, like, Snipers definitely fell off for me compared to other archers. But I don't think I can have Sniper and Swordmaster in the same tier. So, yeah, I think Swordmaster's got to get bumped down, and Sniper's going to go here in C tier. Snipers, to me, are useful, but nowhere near as useful as I expected. Primarily because their biggest use case is for dealing with enemy flyers and enemies that have high evade or attacks that allow them, or abilities that allow them to guaranteed evade something. The thing is, by the time you're rocking these promoted classes, you have a lot of tools to be able to deal with those things, and at that point, the Sniper's biggest niche is lost. From there on, they're basically just ranged damage dealers, and there's a lot of those. Like, things like a Gryphon Master can basically do everything that a Sniper can do, except for having guaranteed True Strike, and there's a lot of different ways to give guaranteed True Strike, and different units that can do it as well. So, they're not bad by any means, but it would not be my first choice, even among archers. So, I think, contextually, Sniper is going to be C tier. They are not bad. They have their use cases. They will get the job done if you let them, especially if you use things like Arrow Rain. But there's just better options out there. There are just better options out there. And we're about to talk about one, actually. So, Shieldshooter. These are an S tier class. Easily. They can tank. They can dodge tank. They can heal allies with a few different methods. They can deal massive damage, even higher to enemy flyers. They can poison. They have a follow-up attack. They do it all, and they look good doing it as well. Like, there's not that much more I need to say about shield shooters, honestly. They just kick so much ass, man. Like, shield shooters are awesome. They're so versatile. They're happy in any squad. They can fill so many different niches and not really be any worse off for filling any of them than a more dedicated unit. Like, they'll lose some utility compared to, like, when they're healing to a priest or a cleric or a bishop or whatever, sure. But they're going to get the job done in most use cases. So I think they're phenomenal. I want so many more shield shooters in future runs. They're great. They're in S tier. All right, got to pick this up a little bit. So, rogues. Rogues, much like snipers, actually fell off a lot for me. I think they are a C tier class. I have other evade tanks that I like more. The ability to steal passive points is still useful, but not as useful as it is in the early game. Their damage output is terrible. Their ability to poison is nice, but there are other options for it. Their biggest utility is just having the guaranteed evade, but that's way less useful when you've got full units of enemies. Oftentimes with row attacks, they're just burning evades incidentally, you know? More often than not, I was actually using my rogues as backline field medics that could also toss out some poison or steal some passive points here and there. And they were fine. Again, like, they were okay. But there was just other classes that I preferred to use. It's a shame because I love thieves in the early game. And again, I don't think that rogues are bad, but there's just other ways to go about it for me. So yeah, C tier class. Great Knights. Great Knights are insane. They are an S tier class. They bump out Knights. They don't bump out Knights, but they are one tier higher than Knights because they are so damn tanky and because their damage output goes through the roof so much. The fact that they're able to buff ally cavalry units, that fact that they get like insane like row pursuits that pierce column pursuits that pierce, like, it's so disgusting. Pile thrust is ridiculous. Like, as raw damage units, Great Knights and Breakers, man, are truly, truly horrifying. They're cavalry, so they're fast. They've got the shields. They're pretty tanky. I love them. Absolutely an S tier class, bar none. Sainted Knight, also an S tier class alongside Radiant Knight, no question. Radiant Knights were already S tier and Sainted Knights are literally just more of the same but better. Like, they're one of the only examples in the game of a class that literally power creeps itself. They get their ability, like Saint Strike or whatever it is. That is just their base Hacha ability, but just stronger. It costs the same amount of AP, it gets the same bonus effects as the base version, but hits more, deals more damage, and has extra effects. Like, it's literally just power creeping itself. They're an S tier class. They're absolutely disgusting. They're tanky. They deal good damage. They have great magical defense. They can heal and protect their allies. There's no getting around it. Sainted Knights are awesome. Doom Knights. This one was... I have debated a lot with myself about this one because I also think Doom Knights are an S tier class, which is a nice jump from the B tier that Dark Knight was in. Because they get a mix of magical and physical, they can burn, they can do all of these row attacks. Their damage output is gross, especially with their, Diabolic Pact that can tank their HP to increase their damage. And as a promoted class, they've got so much more HP to work with, so many more stats to work with. The whole thing just comes together so much better than Dark Knight. And they're just raw versatility with the fact that they can deal magical and physical damage and also poison. They go in S tier. They're not the single highest damage in the game from what I've seen, but that doesn't matter. Like, they're able to do so much. And again, as cavalry, like, they've got a lot of versatility as well. They get bonus damage against infantry. They're just really, really, really good. So, yeah, I think Doom Knights have a nice glow up from B tier as well. They're awesome. Bishops. Bishops, I think, are going in A tier. They don't fall any further than that compared to the cleric that was in S, but by the time you've got bishops, you do have a nice variety of other support units, including healing units, that make it a little bit harder to vie for that top slot. And they also don't have some of the other nice capabilities that other support units have. They've got no damage. Literally, they can not attack in any way, shape, or form, which is not unique to them, but still. They've got, like, good healing. They've got the ability to remove debuffs, and they can resurrect, which is nice. But resurrections are actually less useful than I would have expected when things are coming back at 1 HP, you know? Like, if you have methods of healing them once they're back up, that's great. But, like, Bishop just does what Cleric does, but a little more. And when you've got so many other crazy options flying around in the latter game, with all these different promoted classes and everything, that isn't always enough compared to the overwhelming power that Cleric has in the early game. Like, if you've got a squad with a Cleric in it, they're nigh indestructible. Not the case with a Bishop. They're still really annoying to get through, but it is way easier to do. So yeah, I think they do fall down to A tier. Warlock. Warlock is actually tough because I've literally never used one. It is the only class in the game I've never used, and that is because no one in the first campaign requested a wizard. I only had Aush, and I did use Aush, but he never got the chance to be promoted. And as in my other runs that I've started, I haven't gotten to the point where I can get promotions either. So I can only go off of what I've seen with enemy warlocks, and I think that puts them squarely in B tier. Again, this is hard to say since I've not used them myself, but they kind of fall into the similar situation that snipers are in, where they just are damage dealers, and that's it. Like, it's not bad. B tier is perfectly middle of the road. Like, they get the job done. They do what they need to do. But there comes a point where you only need to deal so much damage, and there's a lot of different ways to deal damage, and as such, they kind of are hindered by their lack of utility and versatility, and also the fact that they are so damn squishy, and without dedicated support, they're just going to crumble. So this is a very tenuous rating. Take this one with a grain of salt. Once I use more warlocks in future runs, yeah, I might have to revisit the way I think about them, but for now, this is what it feels like to me. I never felt threatened by a warlock, really, put it that way. So they're going to sit in B tier. Now, Sorceress, on the other hand, absolutely continues to rock in S tier. They're just doing everything that witches were doing, but better. They've got so many different good capabilities. The fact that they can quick cast makes them great combo dealers, or combo wielders, I should say. They're just so good. Like, if Witch is going to be an S tier, Sorceress is going to be an S tier. The ability to deal really good magic damage, the ability to freeze, the ability to quick cast, the ability to give allies guaranteed hits. Ice Coffin is disgusting. Like, very strong class. I've always been happy with them. Whenever I'm using a unit that has a Sorceress in it, I'm happier for that Sorceress being there. And to me, that means that it is easily an S tier class. Druid is also an S tier class. Like, Druid is just so insane. Having a Druid in any given squad is going to so severely hamper the enemy. It's not, like, again, it almost feels broken. Like, I think I said that about Shaman as well. It almost feels broken just how disgustingly strong they are. And the fact that they get a start of battle ability that just tanks enemies' abilities to function, including their initiative, into the dirt, like, man, it's hard to get around that. You know, anyone who's fought a squad of Berserkers, or I think the fight that everyone complains about is 2 Shamans and 2 Gladiators, not Berserkers. But either way, 2 giant beefy boys and 2 Druids in the back, nerfing everyone's attacks that the beefy boys just heal over and over without ever coming even close to dying, and then cleave your entire team in half. It's gross for a reason, and that reason is Shamans. So yeah, Druid is S tier, absolutely. I'm always happy to have a Druid in any given squad. Wyvern Master. Wyvern Master is interesting. I do like them. I did have a Wyvern Master in my Elaine squad for pretty much the entire run. However, I don't think they're as good as Gryphon Masters, and spoiler alert, Gryphon Masters are going to be an S tier easily. So I think Wyvern Master is going to be an A tier. They kind of have a little bit of a weird identity crisis where they get like this fire breath where they can burn things, which is like fine. It's not as damaging as something like the Doom Knight's flame attack. They have more like column piercing, which is not as useful as row attacks. They have a sort of like weird dodge, parry, counter thing going on, which can be good, but becomes basically useless against anything with high defense. Like, they're good, don't get me wrong. They're not anything lower than A tier, but I don't think I can put them in S tier. Like, they're resoundingly good, and that's it. I do like what they have going on, for sure, but they do get overshadowed a bit by Gryphon Master, and I think we're just going to go and move on and talk about them, because really, basically what I'm doing already. Gryphon Master, as I mentioned, easy S tier. Like, bar none, Gryphon Master is so gross. The fact that they have a ranged row attack that deals massive damage and also drains actions off of any enemies that were full health and they got hit by the attack if they managed to survive it in the first place. Like, bro, what? Like, the skill is mistranslated in-game to say that the Griffin loses an action point if they use that attack when they're at full HP. It was, like, a little weird, but fair, because this attack is so strong that potentially having it cost 3 AP instead of 2 unless you've taken a hit seems like a fair balancing move. And that is incorrect. You literally drain the AP off of the enemy instead. Like, bro, I thought the mistake was fair, and you just made it so much more powerful. Like, what in the good goddamn? That is insane. Yeah, just the evasion, the self-healing, the ability to grant initiative to their allies, all of the different row attacks. Like, Gryphon Masters have one dud ability in their attack that deals damage based on, like, half of their HP or whatever, but that's fine. They literally do not need that attack, and they still crush everything anyway. They are disgusting. They're a great flying unit. They're always a joy to have in any given team just because their damage output is so high. Gryphon Masters are phenomenal, and they are an easy S tier. High Priestess. This is another weird one. As similar to Warlock, I almost wish I had a not applicable tier because I haven't really used High Priestess at all. Like, I can theoretically talk about the skills and why they'd be useful and all that type of stuff, and I do that in the class overview, but I've never actually used it in practice. So it's hard to say definitively what makes it good and or bad. With that in mind, though, it's basically a super bishop that can attack. So I think at baseline, it can't be below bishop. So I'm going to put High Priestess in A. By all means, if you disagree with that sentiment, let me know in the comments. If you think it should be higher, lower, whatever, strike up a conversation there. Because, like, unlike with Warlock that I could at least see in action against me, I've never played with High Priestess. I've never seen High Priestess in action. I just know, based off of Scarlet's base class, what it does generally loosely. And it is good. So I think A is where it's going to sit. Let me know what you think about that. We're going to move on. And speaking of moving on, we are hitting the last class here, Valkyrie. This is the unique class of Virginia and Queen Elenia. It's very, very good. Yeah, I haven't used promoted Virginia much at all, but of course we've seen Queen Elenia, and she's really, really strong. Just the counters are great. The self-healing is great. The double shields give you a lot of versatility when it comes to different effects that you can have. The fact that you can counter flyers, armors, get big, like, triple combo attacks in there. It's a phenomenal class. I think it's S tier, absolutely. You know, it's not as powerful as something like, say, Great Lord or High Lord. Really, if I had, like, an S+ tier, that's probably where High Lord and High Lord alone would be. But Valkyrie is awesome. It cannot be anywhere lower than A tier, I don't think. It's just is way too versatile, way too tanky, and has way too good damage output to be anywhere else. And with that is my very abbreviated tier list of all of the promotions in Unicorn Overlord. I could have waxed on about each of those classes for way longer, but y'all don't need that in your lives, and I unfortunately don't have time for it tonight as the time of this recording. So I think we're going to leave this one sit here for now. There's a little bit of blood here in this one, knocking Swordmaster down to D, man. Like, it feels right. I didn't want to do it, but it does feel right to me. Sniper and Rogue in C. I don't know. I feel like I'm going to be catching some flack on this one. So by all means, strike up a conversation in the comments. Be polite. Be respectful. Tell me I'm crazy if you want, but, you know, in a not super aggressive internet kind of way, if you can. You know, we try to keep it nice around here. You guys have probably seen I do fire back readily if people do wind up acting up in the comments, and I will not be afraid to do so here as well. But be respectful to each other, to me. Let me know what you think, where you think maybe some of these classes should be moved up, moved down, all that type of good stuff. I'm excited to see what y'all have to say. And then, yeah, I'm thinking this is going to be out before the actual class overview, so look for that in the next day or two after this comes out, as I go into a more in-depth discussion of each of the classes that we went into today. With that said, though, my name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. I hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there. And remember, be good to each other. Bye now.